to another episode of In the Green Room with Aidan Keene. I'm very excited today. We have a very special guest, Mr. Lenie Colacino, who was portrayed Paul McCartney in the cast of BeatleMania on Broadway and off Broadway, and continues to do so in the show The Cast of Beatlemania. And he's also currently touring with the legendary Jay and the Americans. So, Lenny, thank you for being here with me today.
Pleasure, Aidan. It's nice to meet you finally.
Nice to meet you too. I saw you actually twice this summer on the Happy Together tour. So
You did.
I did.
You were one of many.
I was. Yeah, we really enjoyed it. We went twice within a month because we loved the show.
And where did you see us, by the way?
The first time was the South Shore Music Circus in Cohasset in the round.
Right, I remember that. Sort of an indoor-outdoor venue.
Yes, and then we went to the Lynn Auditorium as well.
Cool, cool.
Yeah.
So let me guess, you're from the greater Boston area.
I am. I'm from the South Shore. Yeah, not far from Plymouth.
I didn't hear it in your speech, the accent, but I lived in Boston when we were touring with Beatlemania back in 1979, I believe. So I'm giving away a lot of age-related information. Yeah, I dropped my scarf. Okay, never mind.
Yeah, you actually came not too far from me. I believe it was last year, or the year before. The cast of Beatlemania played in Hanover at the.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
the next town over from me. So,
cool.
so I'd love to have my listeners learn more about you. Could you tell us about your musical start and how you
Yeah, well,
started?
I come from a non-musical family. My mom and dad never exhibited any shred of musical ability. I'm not putting them down. No one else in my family basically could carry a tune. My older brother, my younger sister. So, I was like many of my generation, just smacked in the head and bowled over when I saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. I guess I was about 11 years old at the time.
Wow.
That was the genesis. I'd always shown an ability to sing. I mean, in elementary school, I was singing in the chorus, and then our sixth grade production of the not the Pirates of Penzance. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It was HMS Pinafore, the operetta by Gilbert and Sullivan. So I was caught with the showbiz bug very early.
Very cool. And were you when you saw the Beatles for the first time, were you immediately drawn to Paul McCartney, or was that a later?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you the story. I guess I've told it before, but I was at my uncle's wedding, as a matter of fact, as an 11-year-old, the night of the Ed Sullivan performance. And I had to sneak out to the bar because that was the only place in the venue where there was a television. So, and of course, there weren't a lot of choices, as the Beatles themselves would have pointed out, as to what to watch. So the bartender had the Ed Sullivan Show on. I watched from my little seat there, nursing my ginger ale or whatever I was drinking. And then, I had heard the Beatles before I saw them, as is the common experience for a lot of people my age, because they were played on the radio, and we all had our little transistor radios as kids, hooked in with like maybe a single, earbud to listen in mono, so our parents wouldn't hear what we were playing. So, like many others, that was my introduction. Their music was the first thing I heard. I was never at that age. I hadn't seen them even, and it was just a tremendous phenomenon. Something that can't happen today. But I think the paucity of other media made their impact greater. So when I saw them, and I saw that Paul McCartney had this peculiar thing about him, that his guitar was pointing in the other direction, and which I quickly learned that he was left-handed.
Mm-hmm.
And being left-handed myself, it had always been a burden up until that point, because you were labeled as clumsy, or you were you were of the devil. If you were left-handed, you were sinister. All these things that were associated with left-handedness were mostly negative. Gauche, Reeve Gauche, the left bank, and so on. Suddenly, and thankfully, it was cool to be a lefty.
It's awesome. And were you, into music before the Beatles, or was the Beatles your introduction to music?
Well, my introduction to pop music, like I said before, I played clarinet in the fourth grade orchestra, and I always had the ability to sing, and that served me well, of course, later when I got into being a professional musician. But as a child, even before I was, of double-digit age, I was drawn to music. My parents loved music, and they would play it constantly in the house. I was drawn to the soundtrack of West Side Story when I was like 6 or 7 years old. I guess it was around 1960 when the album came out of the Broadway show. I had an ear for it always, and my mom was one of the Bobby Soxers. She followed Frank Sinatra back in her day, and my dad always loved music, but none of them would be singing around the house or playing an instrument. That would come later for me as well.
Right. So moving ahead, obviously, I'm a tribute artist. I have my own Elvis show here in Massachusetts, and
You do Elvis?
I do. I have been
You're
doing
too
Elvis
young to
for,
be Elvis, man.
well, I do the young Elvis.
Yeah, that's my favorite Elvis. That's about Elvis impersonators, and I've worked with tons of them through the years. They tend to gravitate towards the jumpsuit
Mhm.
stuff, and my favorite era of Elvis was always the young stuff, the
Me
hillbilly
too.
cat.
Me
So
too.
good on you, Aiden.
Thank you. But it's so noticeable to me that there are two artists that are so heavily covered, and that's Elvis and then the Beatles. There's
Yeah,
so many Beatle cover bands out there, but BeatleMania, I believe, was one of, if not the first, at least the first very popular one.
yeah.
So how did your journey with BeatleMania get started?
Um, I was living in Pennsylvania at the time. I was in a band called Ralph. Don't ask. And I was maybe 21, 22 years old at the time. Always been Beatle freak. As a matter of fact, the band I was in was known for its Beatle covers. I had always, had a voice similar to McCartney's, and I was never shy about telling anybody about it either. In my ancient black and white TV in my little apartment there in Scranton, I would see the ads for Beatlemania, which started in late 1977. And when I saw it, or heard about the show, I thought, well, that's something I could do. And then I would watch the commercials, and I saw the first time I saw my now good friend Mitch Weissman, who portrayed Paul originally in the original cast of Beatlemania. I came in to the Broadway production about 3 or 4 months after that. I thought, well, they got the right guy. This guy is a dead ringer from McCartney, and from the commercials I saw, I said, well, I guess they got the right guy. So when, as is the usual thing about Broadway shows, when they become successful, as Beatlemania did, they needed more cast members because the original cast, Mitch, Joe Pecorino, Leslie Fradkin, and Justin McNeil, were shipped out to Los Angeles to open the show there. When that happened, that's when they put out a call for auditions for additional musicians. So I packed up one afternoon. I studied up on 4 or 5 Beatles songs. I drove into Manhattan expecting to be turned away. Um, I didn't know, the talent pool at that point, what it would be like. But there was a big cattle call with a couple hundred people there, and everybody got up, and some people didn't even know they had to sing or play. They just thought they had to mime to records or something. So they were quickly dismissed, and some people got the heave ho after 4 bars or so. I thought maybe I could do this, so I got up and I knew I was doing well. They after one song they asked me if I knew any other songs, and I kept playing and singing like at least 4 songs completely with the band that was there who were also in the Broadway show. The Broadway show consisted of 2 bands at all times. They needed, because the workload was so heavy, one set of Beatles could not complete 12 shows a week. That was rather brutal. Actually, it was brutal to do 6 shows a week. So I was hired on the spot. So I must have made a good impression. And that was the genesis of it, And a few months later, I made my debut on Broadway, and boy, I've been doing it a long time, Aiden.
That's awesome, though. And actually, my first episode of this podcast over the summer was with Ron McNeil, who is the founder of the Fab Four, obviously, and he said that Beatlemania was really what got him started, and aside from the records, is what got him started into putting this show together. So it was an
Yeah,
inspiration.
I hear that a lot, believe it or not. I sort of feel two ways about that, a little proud and a little, embarrassed because there are so many Beatle bands out there. It's insane to this day. And it's just that, it just shows the power of their music. I get that a lot. I've spoken to Ron and Artie and all the guys in his band. I basically know everybody who's doing it now and anybody who's ever done it. Sometimes they come to me for advice, or I was running my own little Beatles-based boot camp site for fledgling McCartney wannabes as far as the bass playing goes. But it's a tough role because you not only have to sing, you have to play and look a certain way and all that. So and speak a certain way. So yeah, kudos to all those guys out there, especially those guys that were natural righties who turned it over to play left-handed. Luckily, I was so blessed when I got on the stage for the first time at the Winter Garden Theater. The stage manager, who was not up on his Beatle facts, told me my guitar was pointing the wrong way because I was left-handed. So I had to gently and very gently tell him that no, McCartney was left-handed and so on.
I'm wondering too, because obviously crowds have changed over time. At that point, when Beatlemania was still new, and I mean, somewhat fresh off the Beatles breakup too, only in
Yeah,
1970,
yeah.
what were
Uh-huh.
the crowds like, and how did they take Beatlemania live at first?
Well, it depended what night and what performance we're talking about here.
Mm.
Because the original Broadway show, we were very, very, they kept adding shows. Normally there are 8 shows a week. We did as many as 11 on Broadway, and on the bus and truck tours, as many as 14
Wow.
shows a week. And because the songs were so heavily tilted towards Paul, of the 29 songs in the show, 19 were McCartney leads. It was a tough role to fulfill well night after night. So that's why it was good having two bands. On the bus and truck version, it was just one band, and get out there and do it however best you can. So I think I lost a train of thought as to what your original question was.
Just how the audience was taking
Oh
it at
yeah,
the
the
time. Yeah.
audience. Thank you for reminding me, Aiden. I tend to my mind wanders sometimes. Yeah, like I said, depending on what time and what day. When we would do Wednesday matinees, it was usually a 2 o'clock performance, and that was the performance that was generally the wildest audience because they were like usually class trips for high schoolers. So we would be in the wings waiting to go on, and they would play a little montage of songs. And the first song that would come up was Chubby Checker's "Let's Twist Again." And when the audience was darkened and the music came on, there was a roar from the audience of those kids. We knew, like, well, this is going to be an easy one. So the earlier the show was on Saturdays, for example, we had 3 shows, 3 in one day, 2, 7, and 10. And 2 o'clock, insane, a lot of kids. 7, okay, kind of middle of the road. 10 o'clock on Saturday was the toughest audience because they were usually the older folks who had, made dinner reservations, and they were full of food and wine and whatever. So they were basically the dullest audience. The one was sitting back, going like, "Entertain me. Go ahead. See if you can make me applaud." So it was like pulling teeth a little at times, and other times it was very easy. So it really depended on what time of day and show.
That's awesome though, that it was the younger people that were
Oh yeah.
enjoying it so much. That's very
Like you
cool.
said, a lot of younger people you might have thought, even in the 70s and 80s, were past the Beatles, and I'm continually surprised by how this music is universal to just about every age group even today.
I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important for tribute bands to exist today because they're still carrying that music on. No
Yeah.
matter which tribute show I go to, there's always kids there, and that's really cool.
Yeah, there's some that are really great and some that aren't so great. I've seen my fair share, believe me, but I can only speak for my own band that we are really dedicated to getting it right. And it ain't that easy. Look, even now, I am still refining my bass parts and my vocal parts. So with, you know, I won't bore you with the details, but we didn't have the tools available back in 1978 that are available now. That is, you know, all these isolated tracks and people able to separate out all the vocals and the drums and, you know, the kick drum you can hear on Help, for example. You know, all we had was a record player,
Right.
and we had to get everything from there. So your ears were an important tool.
And that's what helps me too. I mean, learning a lot of the things that I learned, I'll find with the Beatles, I'll find tracks and live recordings that I never even knew existed.
Yeah,
We have a record store near us, and I was there the other night and I saw an album, and I think it was recorded in Germany, but it's a white album. It's the Beatles' first live recordings or something like that.
yeah, yeah.
I had no
Well,
idea that existed.
well, back in the day, we were very hungry for bootlegs
Hmm.
and alternate mixes and releases. You mentioned the German. For many years, the entire Magical Mystery Tour album, which was an amalgamation by Capitol, you know, because originally it was released as a double EP in England, and we couldn't get imports at record stores until maybe the early '80s, and then we started hearing beautiful stereo mixes of like Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane and All You Need Is Love. That was the first time those tracks were available in stereo. So that was like mind blowing. And then all the bootlegs of the Washington, D.C. concert or Shea Stadium started leaking out, and slowly and slowly and slowly, all this material became available. And look, even today, I just heard a version, and I put it on my Facebook page, of the first take of In My Life, which I'd never heard before,
Mm.
with John's voice isolated and a couple of musical things that didn't quite make the final thing. So, you know, it goes on and on.
It's incredible. Thank God for YouTube too. I always say that.
Really, YouTube. I was thinking like I never changed a car battery myself until YouTube came along. You know?
I get that. So the show that you have now too, the cast of Beatlemania. Tell me more about that. Is that the original cast that you were with?
No, this has been going on for about 30 years. The
Hmm.
cast of Beatlemania. I formed this back when we left the show, when the show closed actually. So the three of us were it was me, Rich Gomez, and Bob Forte from our original band. The guy who played John, Mike Palakis, stayed with the show a little longer, so he was not available to do the show with us. So we started out playing in the clubs, and then it got bigger and bigger. So through the years, certain guys left or no longer wanted to be in it. So the name changed, but as of right now, I'm the only original member of the Broadway production. But we still kept the name because at least one of us has that authentic lineage, you know.
And it's such a great show too. I mean, you still sound great.
Well, thank you.
Um,
That's nice of you to say. We're actually playing this Saturday somewhere. I forget where. Somewhere in Connecticut, I believe it's. Yeah, I actually I'm embarrassed to say I don't know where we're playing.
that's all right. Well, I hope you make it back to Massachusetts sometime too, because
We loved. I remember we played in Boston for an extended run at the end of for an end of 1978 was it the Blackstone? No, the Blackstone was Chicago. I forget the name of the theater. It was right next to what they used to call the Combat Zone, if you know what I'm talking about.
maybe it was the Orpheum or
No,
no.
no. Well, the Combat Zone, if I can say it discreetly, was where more adult-oriented entertainment used to be in Boston. It no longer is,
Oh,
but
okay.
it was a long time ago.
There's a
uh,
few places in Boston that don't exist anymore that I'm wondering maybe.
oh yeah, yeah. You know, I lived on Commonwealth Ave
Oh yeah.
out there. I would take the Green Line in to the theater every day, and it was. I think of all the audiences that I've played for in the the original setting of the show, Boston could have been the most memorable. They just loved the Beatles in Boston, and it really showed. I mean, I've been doing this all over the world and all over the country. There's some places where the Beatles are just revered. Many places in South America or Japan or Asia and Europe where I've performed, they are revered sometimes more there than they are in England, of course. Well, England tends to like American music, and that's part of why the Beatles existed, because they grew up on Chuck Berry and Little Richard and the Everly Brothers and so on.
Boston sure does love the Beatles. In fact, right around my 10th birthday, I got to see Paul at Fenway Park, and that is still one of the coolest things I've ever experienced.
Oh, yeah. I've seen Paul a few times. It was like a religious experience for me. I got a bit of access to backstage, and I took some photos of his guitars. And this is well before his most recently unearthed cavern bass, as they call it, was discovered. The missing bass for 50 years.
Mm.
So I got some nice up close photos of his current guitar rack. So that the instruments were like almost as much fun as the performance, but it was so great seeing him after all this time.
I just remember being a little guy, and everyone was standing, obviously, and I couldn't see anything. And I was like, I'm not gonna be able to see him. And then the big screen came on, and he comes out and he's pumping his fist, and I look back, my dad has tears running down his face. It was
Yeah,
a
you
cool
gotta.
moment.
Yeah, I'm sure if your dad is probably younger than I am. Uh, if you grew up in this time, um, it had much more impact on you than, let's say, if you did not. Like my own son, it's his birthday today, by the way. He grew up in a household where this Beatle music was playing all the time, and per usual, your children tend, or generations tend to reject the music of their parents until they get older and then realize that all music is good music no matter when it was produced. So, and I grew up in a household where my mom and dad were not happy about my, absolute adoration of the Beatles. Of course, they were seen as this cultural shift also, that we're all going to be hippies and have really long hair and up the establishment and all that stuff. It was a turbulent time, the '60s, as you probably know. So, but we turned out okay. We would.
Absolutely. My dad was born in 1968, so he wasn't growing up with the Beatles per se, but the music was there in his life for sure.
Yeah.
Which brings me to my next thing, which I'm curious about because it's interesting. Yesterday was the 45th anniversary of John Lennon's passing, and my dad was 12
Mm.
and still remembers that day like it was yesterday and how horrific it was. And I'm wondering, as a Beatle fan, how that impacted you at the time, and if you looked at the songs any differently when that happened, or if you found new meaning in it.
Um, no, just maybe more intense. Like anybody who was aware at that time, I remember I was preparing for my children's first birthday party the night before in my apartment. And like a lot of us, we heard the news through Monday Night Football. Howard Cosell
Hmm.
broke the news. And my initial thought was that when Cosell said it, he didn't say he was dead, he said he was shot.
Right.
And the cynic in me thought, well, this is going to elevate John to sainthood. Hope he survives. And then shortly after that, I turned on my local FM radio station, WNEW here in New York, and I was listening for any updates, and a Bruce Springsteen song was playing, and the DJ broke in and announced that John was dead. I was absolutely stunned. But I had to put on a brave face because people were coming in the house the next day and all that. Um, it it's to this day it hurts. It still hurts. I can recall how I felt then and what a great loss it was, and to all of us in so many ways, especially musically. God knows what John had left in the tank for us to hear, but we'll never know. And I can still get misty about it. Look, when I was doing a solo McCartney show, and I would do McCartney's song Here Today, which was his ode to John Lennon. And I had to stop doing it because it was too emotional to perform. Believe it or not, I just could not. The music of that song and his sentiment and maybe his regret or his feelings for John, maybe which were not fully realized, that's a terrible thing and a terrible burden to carry, I would imagine. The other part of that is that 2 weeks later, we were on the road in the bus and truck version of the show. And the focus just changed 180 because it was always on McCartney, the focus of that show. And now people were coming out, looking for something, some sort of solace in the music we were playing. So the focus changed in the audience from all of us to strictly John. And the John Lennon at the time that I was working with, Joe Pecorino, who is still one of my closest friends, he was the original John and on the Broadway show, and he came out to do this version of the show. And he was, I wouldn't say terrified, but he was made very aware that this shift in the audience attention was squarely on him. And people were looking, like I said, towards that character. Like John will live through, the guy who's now singing this song. And it was a burden that he felt very heavily. And there was nothing we could do about it. We were booked to play. I remember it was in Evansville, Indiana, on the 27th or 28th of December. 3 weeks, 2 weeks, and 2.5 weeks after John was murdered. We had to get up there and perform. And in many ways, the audience was much more tuned in. It was a little less fun for them, but a lot more, emotional. Because, like I said, they were looking for something to soothe themselves, and so were we. So it was a big change. And think about it, like you said, it's 45 years ago that happened. I can still carry that same emotion, or I could summon it up if I think about it. And the hurt is deep, very deep.
The pain of losing a hero is certainly real, and I never really experienced it until yesterday. I'll get to that in a second, but having grown up with this music from decades before me, a lot of the musicians that I know and love have already passed on, like Elvis and John Lennon and Roy Orbison and artists like that.
Mm-hmm.
And yesterday, one of my heroes, Raul Malo from the Mavericks, passed away.
Yeah.
And it's been an emotional day because it just having someone that I've seen live multiple times and looked up to and played his music in my solo shows and with band, it's really painful.
Well, Aidan, you've got a lot of your life ahead of you. Take it from a fellow who's a little older. That is the yin and yang of getting older. Is that you will see a lot of the people you love and admire pass on. Big one for me was Brian Wilson.
Oh yeah.
Over the summer, I put Brian Wilson on a pedestal, big pedestal. That is. Musically, I would put him above the Beatles in a lot of ways. Not that it's a competition; it never is.
Right.
But that was a fellow I wouldn't have given you much good odds that he would have lived past 1980.
Yeah.
But his resurrection and his ability to come back from all that and all his woes and ills and his family infighting and all this other stuff, mental illness, drugs, whatever. I wasn't surprised by his passing. I was on the Happy Together tour when it happened this summer. Mm-hmm. But it's still, it made me recall, all the great music he gave to all of us. And that's just a part of life, unfortunately. The older I get, the more friends I see passing away, the more music idols I will. I suppose if I live long enough, I'll see a lot more of that happening in my lifetime, and I'm kind of prepared for it. I mean, it doesn't mean you don't care about it, right. But it's like you have to have a certain level of acceptance that this is going to happen. It's like, dogs don't live forever. If you get a dog that lives for 15 years, you're blessed and so on. So I get that, and if that's part of wisdom or wisdom of age, then so be it. I'll accept that. But yeah, it's tough, Aiden, as you know.
I'll just leave that topic by saying thank God we have the music, and that will
Yeah.
always last, you know.
Well, that's what I wrote. If you follow me on Facebook, I wrote a little piece about it the day he died, and that Brian Wilson, that is, and the music's all there. Despite everything that beset him, all the negativity he plowed through. He got his art out there, and that's what art is all about. Art should hit you on a visceral level as well as, a joyful level. And, his music does that for me, and so much music does. But I think when it really hits your soul, then the artist has fulfilled his purpose in making that art.
Yeah, it's a tough thing, but got to keep the music alive, which you
Yeah.
do, and I appreciate you for that. Which brings me to the next topic, the Happy Together tour and your time with Jay and the Americans. I mean, that is just timeless music that is still being brought to the stage today. So I'd love to learn more about how that happened for you.
You might enjoy this story as it ties into Beatlemania, believe it or not. The fellow who hired me for my previous long-winded story about being hired was that his name was Sandy Yaguda, and his name still is Sandy Yaguda. If that name sounds familiar, he is one of the founding members of Jay and the Americans. He was the musical director of BeatleMania on Broadway.
Wow.
Oh, okay. Now, okay, I had not spoken to or had any communication with Sandy since 1980, perhaps. Now, through a mutual friend, another musical director of Beatlemania, his name is Andy Dorfman, was we were all knew each other back in the day, but Andy was the musical director of Beatlemania in Chicago and on the road, and even on Broadway after Sandy left the position. Not Sandy, but Andy Dorfman called me earlier this year. I would say it was back in April, and said, would I be interested in playing bass for Jay and the Americans? And I thought initially, I don't know, I'm pretty happy with what I'm doing now. I don't know if I want to go back on the road per se. And I looked at their schedule, and didn't look so horrible as far as like being away.
Mhm.
Um, 2 or 3 gigs a month. Maybe I could. I thought about it, and I said, yeah, you know what? Yeah, let's do that. So I was hired back in April, I think it was, just to play bass. I was happy doing it. I did not need to be out front with the Americans, so to speak. I was happy to just be playing bass back there. Hi, fellas. Carry on. I did one gig, up in Schenectady at the Proctor Theater, I believe, and it went well, fine. When's the next gig? Look at our schedule, Sandy would say to me, which is funny, just to reconnect with him after so long. It's so synchronous. It's crazy. I get a call like 2 days after that gig. Hey, we need you for the Happy Together tour. Because I was told, we don't need you for the Happy Together tour because, we don't need a bass player. There's a band that plays for all the acts, as you probably noticed. So what do you need me for? I said, Marty Sanders, who, along with not Jay, but Sandy, are the 2 original members of Jay and the Americans. And Marty took ill. Marty was slated to do the Happy Together tour. So now they needed another guy, a third guy, because Sandy wasn't going to do the tour either. A little too much work for a man of his of his stature and age.
Right.
So I was recruited very quickly to be one of the 3 upfront guys, as you probably noticed when you saw us. And I had to do a lot of scrambling. I had to learn all the vocal parts, put down the bass, get my passport, all my travel stuff together in one place to do this job. And there was no rehearsals, no charts. Just here's a plane ticket. Here are your outfits for the show. We'll do a rehearsal one night before. Then we were on stage. I said, "Are you kidding?" Not just listen to the records. I'm sure you'll be able to pick that out. So it took a couple of shows for me to find my footing, but all of a sudden there I was. And I was living on a bus again after 40 some years being on tour. It went really well. I was very touched by how I was accepted, not only into the band I was in, but into the company of players of that show. The Cowsills, Gary Puckett, the Vogues, Little Anthony, Ron Dante, the Turtles. All of these guys just took me in as family immediately. I would have been quite okay with them keeping me at a distance, but from the minute I got in there, including the guys in the band who I was on a bus with them every night. So either you're going to get along or you're not. You're going to just stay in your bunk and go to pull the sheets over your head and go to sleep and just take your job. Okay, this is my job. But they made it so much easier. It was a great experience for 3 months basically. I was out there with some of the acts that I grew up listening to. Like you said, what you listened to as a youngster is like, the Cowsills were certainly on my radar, as was Gary Puckett, Little Anthony, for goodness sake. I mean, he's been around forever, and he still sounded great. And, they all just embraced me as family, and that was a really, really great feeling, and it still is. So I stay in touch with all these guys.
We love that show, and my girlfriend and I we were the ones that went twice this year. And and getting to know the Cowsills, it's like you said, you can tell it's a big family. I mean, they are obviously family, but they treat everyone as though everyone's family, and that's really cool.
And I think I forget who it was who told me. So like, oh, don't ingratiate yourself to anybody. Just stay in the background, be cool. Don't approach anybody. If they talk to you, that's fine. And I found that was nonsense. Like, and if you see my appearance with the Cowsills, Susan, for example, said, "Yeah, why were you so shy?" I was okay. Okay. Hey, I made up for it, believe me. We had a lot of laughs.
Bet that's awesome. And I hope the tour happens again next year. I think I saw there's a couple of dates scheduled already, but
It is happening again. We, as Jay and the Americans, are not on it this year. There's a wholesale, turnover of acts, which is fine. We kind of knew that was coming. They usually, try to freshen it up. I think the Trogs are on it this time. I forget who else. They generally, and Little Anthony's not there. I don't think Puckett's on it either. But it's such a great thing about Gary and a couple other people, because we found out what we liked about each other. And one of the things Gary Puckett loves is great coffee, and that's certainly what I love too. So it was kind of my job to go find online where a good coffee shop was the next day. And so, and no one, as you can see under my name, it says Leonard. Well, that is my given name, but I told everybody in the company, no one is to call me Leonard. Call me Lenny. So, of course, Puckett said, okay, Leonard. So then everybody picked up on that, and I kind of took it as just them being cute with me and accepted me. So I was Leonard to everybody on the tour.
that's
So, yeah, that was great. So, yeah, the Happy Together tour will roll on in whatever iteration, and then probably will go on for more years after that. Word is that they probably will have us back in 2027. So, touch wood, and all health being what it is, I look forward to doing that as well.
We'll look forward to seeing you too. We'll miss you next year.
Yeah, I'll miss all my buddies out there, but like I said, we made friends, and these friendships do not end. I hear from all these people through Facebook or through private messaging. We keep in touch with each other, and that is a real blessing.
That's awesome. Big family. Happy
Yeah.
together.
Well, it wasn't BS. It was the truth. Happy together for sure.
Lenny, looking back at your career, you've had so much happen, and I'm curious, what are you most proud of? And for young musicians out there, what would you tell them about pursuing their passion and their careers?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Aidan, because although, I'm best known for BeatleMania and now Jay and the Americans, but I had a very successful jingle career as well. And sang on many, many commercials, did voiceover work in the movies. As a matter of fact, I was hired by Robert Zemeckis to be the speaking voice of McCartney in the remake of Yellow Submarine, which got nixed by Disney.
Mm.
So that's another story for another time. But I thought voiceover and jingle work would sustain me, but everything in show business changes. When Screen Actors Guild went on strike, all the advertisers basically, thumbed their noses at the jingle houses because we weren't allowed to work. So they would just do what they call needle drops. They'd find an old record and put that on instead of somebody speaking or even singing over a commercial. Like I did jingles for Hershey's, Tropicana, the U.S. Army, all those Be All You Can Be ads I sang on. Oh, great. It was a great way to make a living, but it went away. Okay, so, then I did voiceover work. For my voice reel, I would do whatever voices they wanted to. I did an episode of the Wonder Pets, if you know that old
Grew up
show.
with that show.
Well, if you Wonder Pets Save the Beatles, that was me, all three voices of
Wow.
John, Paul, and Ringo. I believe my old friend Tom Teely, also from BeatleMania, did the George part. So through that work, I did a bunch of episodes of the Wonder Pets. So and other things. To get back to your question, what I would tell someone in show business now, I think when I was younger, looking to make a mark in music, it was more the goal was a record deal, right? Because that's the way it worked back then. You got a record deal, you were signed, your album would get released, and people would buy it. Those days are gone. I mean, now with streaming and every other music platform that there is, people complain. I think the latest joke I heard was, "Hey, now that the penny is going away, how are musicians going to get paid?"
Yeah.
So yeah,
Exactly.
that's very close to the truth. So there are those stratospheric uh, artists like that are out there making tons of money playing live, like your Taylor Swifts and your Rolling Stones and McCartney. And then there are, everybody else. Everybody that I knew from the Jingle days who were great composers, writers, and singers who were making a ton of money, on their ads. This went final. It went final. Great. Great. It went final. The checks coming in the mail. All gone. What has happened is that all these people who were in that sort of desk job of music are now back playing live because that's the only way they're making a living. So you sell your merchandise, you do your gigs. And that's why Jay and the Americans has been around all this time. They're not making any new records that are hitting the top 10,
Right.
but we are a viable act. And what I learned over the summer about all these legacy acts is that there are all these acts that are out there, like on the Happy Together tour, that are still working full time. They're out there doing it, and live performance is the way. So I would recommend is study, learn to read. Reading is essential. It was frowned upon in my generation. No, you don't want to be a guy who actually understands music. Well, now, if you want a gig, if you're playing an instrument, reading is really good. Don't neglect that. Don't think it's just going to take you. Even if you're just a singer, learn to read. The quicker you can pick things up, the better off you'll be. Play with as many live musicians as you can. And when I was a kid, it was garage bands and high school bands, and that was the way you learned. I don't know that it goes on much these days. I doubt it actually does. But interact with musicians. Seek out musicians that are better than you. I have a local band that we don't work much. We rehearse a lot. And I'm working with some great musicians. I mean, guys who are way above my skill level, and I'm still learning at my age about the subtleties of bass playing and singing. So, interact with other musicians. It's the way you're going to grow. It's the way you're going to get hired. I mean, there were musicians who, would be first call musicians. If we're talking two different realms here, singing and playing, sometimes you do both. The guys who would make the most money and were most in demand were the ones who could pick things up quickly or read a chart down quickly and deliver the goods without all, this carrying on and carrying on. I mean, when I was doing jingles actively, my Folgers jingle, which was a radio spot, it was a 60-second spot. And it was like making an album. I was in the studio like for 4.5 hours.
Wow.
Just for a 60-second spot. And you also have to have stamina, and you have to have a thick skin, a very thick skin, and be able to accept when people say, no, you're not what we're looking for. And because that happens a lot. And I'm not completely thick-skinned, but it still hurts. But I think you have to, in today's world, just like wipe your feet and move on to the next thing. If you carry that around with you, it's going to just stall you from your ultimate goal. But if you're driven, if you have that success, in your mind, this is what I'm going to be doing, you can't let things like that overcome you. There are millions of stories about very successful musicians who get rejected a lot. Singers, would Bob Dylan have stopped writing or stopped singing because people didn't like the way he sang, back in the Bleecker Street days before he became famous? You got to overcome those obstacles. Taylor Swift will talk about it, how she was, rejected at an early age, but she had that inner drive. So if it's truly in you, that's what I would suggest. Some people fall by the wayside, forget it, I'm going to go sell insurance or something, which is fine, but if this is your ultimate goal, give it your best, give it your all, learn all you can learn.
Thank you for that advice, 'cause I'm taking this too. I'm learning. I'm learning. And one thing, I'm still learning how to read music myself. In fact, I'm still in college and I'll be going into senior year next year, but I'm taking a music fundamentals class next semester because I really want to give it a shot.
Yeah, there are those musicians, and I know a bunch of them, never trained properly, don't read music, but their ears are so good that they don't need it. God bless those people. I'm not one of them. Vocally, yeah, I would put myself in that category. Musically, no. If you put a piano chart in front of me or a guitar, a chord chart I could read, but a bass line, that's very complicated and all over the place. Don't expect me to read that down, take one. So that's what I would recommend, especially if you're a musician. Singers, if you got the ear, you can pick your part out, where you fit in. Believe me, it served me very well on the Happy Together tour. I had one rehearsal the night before we went on stage.
That's
one.
crazy. That's
And
crazy.
luckily, as you know, the Happy Together tour, we only did 5 songs.
Right.
But it took me a good 2 or 3 performances before. What's my part again? What are the lyrics to this song? 'Cause I wasn't going to go up there with an iPad, So,
Yeah.
if you know what I mean. So, yeah, learn, and hone your skill. It will serve you. It will pay you back double in the end.
You heard it here, folks. Learn to read the music. Lenny, it's been an absolute honor talking to you today and learning more about your story and your memories and your love of music. It means a lot to be able to share that.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and please, I'm just a working musician. I'm lucky. I've been blessed with a lot of really good connections and people. I'm sure I have a million other stories I could tell you, Aidan, but thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you for joining me. And for all of those listening, please check out the cast of BeatleMania and Jay and the Americans. They're both fantastic touring groups, and you'll get to see Lenny in action on stage.
Yes, and say hello. Say you saw me on your podcast.
Well, once again, thank you, Lenny, for joining me. It has been a pleasure, and I hope that we get to keep in touch. I always love talking to fellow musicians as well.
I am unbelievably available, unlike many of my musician friends. You can always hit me up on Facebook or message me, whatever, Aidan. I'm happy to know you.
Will do. Thank you very much. And for one last thing for everyone listening, do you have a website or anything that I should link at the end of this
I
episode?
do. If you look up on Facebook, my web links are there. Beatles Based Camp is where I will instruct fledgling bass players in the art of McCartney, which is ever evolving, believe it or not. And that's my main thing. My own personal website is like I did for voiceover and stuff. I don't really use that much. The cast of BeatleMania, of course, moptops.com and the cast of BeatleMania. It's easy to find me, or just Google my name and you'll find all of that stuff.
Sounds good. I will link those at the end of this episode.
All right.
Thank you for joining us, everybody, on In the Green Room with Aidan Keene. Stay tuned for another episode coming soon. And until then, God bless you, and we'll see you soon.
Okay, bye bye.